The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
Well, last week we told you about the killing of Charlie Kirk and how that could have been prevented. Well, today we're going to talk about the shooter, the young man who took out a legend with a bullet, allegedly. My question to you is, could he have gotten away with it? This and more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster, what some people they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charlie Crimebuster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Glad to have you on the Charlie Crime train today. Today we're going to be talking about, the shooter of Charlie Kirk. Could he have gotten away with it? Last week we asked the question, could that have been prevented? I'll let you be the judge of that after you have taken a moment to listen to the podcast. If you've already listened to it, we'd love to hear what you think about it. Just reach out to me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Please don't forget to check out our sponsor, that's peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com, and check us out on the YouTube channel. All those links are going to be in the show notes. By the way, before we get into the focus today, would you take a moment, please, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be notified every time we drop an episode. Again, welcome aboard the Charlie Crime train today. Well, my friend, you cannot help but wonder why the Charlie Kirk shooting is getting so much attention. The airwaves, well, they're filled with continued coverage from all sorts of angles. From Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air for his comments to news about Charlie's memorial service being conducted in a football stadium to hold the crowd, all the way. It's a wide range of information. So some people may wonder, why so much media attention? To be sure now, we all know now that Charlie Kirk was a national figure. He was well known by his fans and critics alike. To his fans, he was a hero. To his critics, an lightning rod. But the circumstances surrounding the shooting has also gotten attention, especially questions about the prevention of such shootings in the future. By the way, please make sure you heard last week's podcast where I covered whether this could have been prevented or not from the perspective of a security expert. Now, many people are closely following the story to try to understand not only the events that led to the tragedy, but some of the broader implications that it may have on public discourse and policy. For sure, this has been an emotional ride, for sure, and the controversy continues to fuel the ongoing coverage and discussions around this case. Then there's the curiosity about the alleged shooter himself, which we are covering on today's podcast. You see, charges were announced against Tyler Robinson. He's a 22-year-old who is accused of shooting and killing Charlie Kirk while Kirk was speaking there at the Utah Valley University. And so it was that Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray, he charged Robinson with aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of witness tampering, and committing a violent offense in the presence of a child. And the attorney, Jeff Gray, he says he's going to seek the death penalty against Robinson. In other words, they threw everything at him, even the kitchen sink. Now, Robinson's background has since come under intense security, while investigators and even the public search for answers. Reports tell us that he was a former student at Utah Valley University. Authorities are continuing to piece together his actions, even now beyond the shooting, hoping to shed light on what could possibly drive this young man who had everything before him to commit such a shocking act. Now, in a remarkable development, well, it is remarkable, I think, because it has now been revealed, and you already know this by now, that he was actually turned in by his own father. By the way, his own father, who was also a law enforcement officer. Now that, too, has added another layer of public interest to this case. People now are talking about, would I have done that with my son? Would I have done that with my child? So we're now talking in the national discourse about the difficult choices that sometimes families have to face when they find themselves in such circumstances. That decision by Robinson's father to notify the police, well, it's even sparked conversations about responsibility, ethics, and our own role of preventing further tragedies by turning in those that we love. We're going to talk a little more about that, and we're going to talk more about this shooter. And we're going to answer the question, is it possible that had he not been turned in, could this shooter have gotten away with this crime of the century? We're going to talk more about that in a moment, but right now it's time for us, as we often do on our Charlie Crimebuster podcast, to take a moment and lighten the load a little bit. To take a moment and get your breath and listen today to Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, our Crazy Crook story today comes from Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd. We have a number of dumb crooks in his bed and breakfast down there. And he tells it this way. He says, early one morning, just before sunrise, a possible accidental 911 call was received with nobody on the line. Deputies then responded to a Lake Wells residence where that call was made. And that phone number, well, it belonged to a man named Clint, with whom the deputies were very familiar with. Let's just say that Clint has been a frequent guest at Grady Judd's bed and breakfast. Plus, Clint also, listen to this, had 3 active felony warrants: failure to appear and for grand theft. And of course, surprise, 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 he was on probation dealing in stolen property. Now, Clint was not hard to find. He was sitting on the ground when the deputies arrived. They yelled to him, "Clint, show us your hands." He refused, but then he yelled back to them, "No, I'm not Clint, I'm Robert." But again, the deputies, they were very familiar with Clint. They knew he was not Robert. So they moved in, and they went ahead and executed the warrant. At that time, he was again found to be in possession with several drugs: crank, ice, rocket fuel, Scooby snacks. Well, Clint was chauffeured to the bed and breakfast, checked in on his 3 warrants, and taken to his guest suite. Well, the corrections officer also, they hooked him up with complimentary charges of additional charges now: possession of meth, possession of drug paraphernalia, providing false ID to LEO, and resisting and violation of probation. So basically, Clint was captured because of his butt dial, but his own butt put his butt in jail. And that, my friend, is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now, you've probably heard a lot in the news about the fact that Tyler's dad turned him in, but it wasn't only his dad, it was also his mom that was involved with her own observations. In fact, when she saw the photo of the person who was suspected of killing Kirk, well, she immediately thought to herself, it looked like her son. So then she calls him, say, "Hey, man, where are you?" And then we get in this information from charging documents that was actually released this last week. So Robinson, Tyler, then tells her, his mom, that he had been sick at home for the past 2 days, using the old sick excuse there. including that day where Kirk was killed. But still, his mom, she could not shake the fact that it sure looked like her son, and who knows her son better than herself. She thought there were similarities between her son's face and the image that was released by law enforcement. And of course that quickly got all over the place as it was circulated online. She then told the police, she began to talk to her husband about that photo. And her husband said, he agreed with her. It really looked like their son. Now remember, folks, this is, they are 200 and something miles away from their son. Their son is 200 and something miles away from the scene where the killing took place. So this is a long-distance type of thing. They were worried, and so they continued to call, and they began to speak to him again and again and again until he finally implied that he was the shooter. That's according to the documents. So then, 33 hours, now get this, 33 hours after the shooting there at Utah Valley University, they talked their son to turn himself in. They had him drive, actually, to their place. Now, these documents, it tells us a little bit about his surrender and about the kind of conversations that took place. His mom also began to talk to the authorities about the fact that she realized that her son over the past year was changing. She basically said that Tyler had become more political, starting to lean more to the left. He was becoming pro-gay and trans rights oriented. Now, we do know that Tyler was registered to vote, but he had not declared a party affiliation. That we find from his state voter records. His parents, we know they are registered Republicans. Then the mom told the police that Tyler, had began to date his roommate. His roommate is transgender. This, of course, provoked several discussions with family members, especially between Tyler and his dad, and they had totally different political views. And we're getting this from these charging documents. In one conversation before the shooting, Tyler, he mentioned that Kirk was holding an event at the university there in Utah, and he called it, now listen to this, because this is going to come up a little later as we talk about this. He called it, quote, unquote, a stupid venue. And of course, Tyler also talked to his dad about he thought that Kirk was spreading hate. In fact, in a text to his roommate after the shooting, Tyler, allegedly, according to reports, he wrote, quote, I had enough of his hatred. Some hate cannot be negotiated out. Tyler told them that since Trump got into office, that his dad was pretty diehard MAGA. Of course, talking about MAGA, the slogan referring to U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, here's something else that really catches your attention. Tyler's dad, when he was talking to the police, he says that when he heard that the rifle that law enforcement found there in the woods was a Mauser Model 98 30.06 caliber bolted rifle with a mounted scope, that certainly caught his attention because it matched the very rifle that he had given his son. That rifle came from Tyler's grandfather. Now, after his wife called about the photo, then Tyler's dad called his son about the gun, and he asked him, hey, send me a picture of it. But Tyler did not respond. Now, this rifle is a very important part of this case. It was so old that the predated serial number, that means the one that makes weapons impossible to track. In other words, it predated those mandates. In other words, it was so old that you did not have to have those serial numbers, and so it really makes the weapon almost impossible to track. Of course, it was known as Grandpa's rifle. It's decades old. It was a German-made gun used in both wars and was on the market years before the law came that you had to have these unique traceable numbers. I believe that happened, well, the laws came just after John F. Kennedy, of course, was assassinated. Then they passed a law that weapons had to be etched with unique traceable numbers. Now, there's actually believed to be millions of such weapons in homes throughout the country. And, of course, now, after this, authorities are concerned with that becoming a potential for other assassins to try to carry out similar acts with these untraceable rifles. We now know that Tyler, he got rid of the rifle. He wrapped it in a towel in a wooded area near the Utah Valley campus, allegedly. Cops did find this weapon several hours after the assassination, but it's really not clear to us whether they have been able to trace it to Tyler. So now we come to think about what would have happened had his family not pressured him into surrendering to cops. Could they have tied that gun to Tyler? Now, of course, Tyler also was very free with his texts afterwards. He even wrote after the shooting to his roommate, "I had enough of his hatred," quote, "some hate can't be negotiated out." I've mentioned that to you. So he is incriminating himself with his own texts. In other words, had he been quiet, what would have happened? Now, as his dad began to talk to him, they come to realize that he was even making some pretty far out statements, like he had planned to die by suicide. Of course, that would have alarmed any parents. And so they began to talk to him and say, come on home, we're going to work this out. And so then he actually drove to their southern Utah home in Washington City, again, some 200 or more miles away. That's where they had lived forever. That's where Tyler had grew up. So we're talking about some long-distance things here. Long distance from the place that the event took place where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Long distance from there to his apartment where he was sharing with a roommate. And then over 200 miles from there to where his parents lived. And Tyler now is telling them, he's a little more open with them, that he was a shooter. He says, I can't go to jail, and I just want to end it all. And again, when they were asking him, well, why did you do this? He said, again, Kirk was just spreading too much hate, according to him. So then, they asked their son to speak to a family friend. This friend was a retired deputy sheriff, according to records. And he came over the house and he talked to Tyler. And so they talked him into turning himself in. And we all know now that we've heard from the sheriff there where he turned himself in that they agreed to a soft surrender to try to keep any incident from happening. And it was the best way to get him in custody. And of course, this friend convinced Tyler to turn himself in. Now, they also told Tyler it would be best if Tyler were to bring all evidence with him to the sheriff's office. In other words, they wanted to do that, hoping that they would maybe be able to forego a active search in his parents' home. Whether that happened or not, I'm not sure. I'm sure it did. I said I'm not sure. I would think that they searched his home. I really don't know whether they did or not, the parents' homes, but more than likely they did. Now, they also, his parents, they, of course, went with him as he turned himself in to the Washington County Sheriff's Office. That was on the night of September 11th when he surrendered. In fact, he even told his roommate about this. He said, I'm going to turn myself in willingly. One of my neighbors here is a deputy. So here is this guy who stopped a legend with a bullet. Now, at the time of his arrest, Tyler was a third-year student in an electrical apprenticeship program at Dixie Technical College in St. George. That was according to the state professional license record. But before that, before he enrolled into this technical college, he had attended Utah State University for one semester back in 2021, and there he was a pre-engineering student after getting a $32,000 scholarship offer. So he was a very smart, intelligent guy. So what happened to him? What brought this smart, intelligent guy into this dark place where he shoots somebody in a mass gathering? We do know that he graduated from Pineview High School in 2021. And so we see the pictures on his mom's Facebook. They all show the family hunting and fishing and just seemingly having a normal upbringing in a loving, caring family. So now, I want to switch gears a little bit. Last podcast, when I talked to you about the tragedy that could have been prevented, I also brought up something that you hear often on this program when we talk about these shootings, what I call Charlie Crimebuster's footprints of a mass shooter. And it belongs along this line. It goes along this line. There's the planning part. There is the procurement of the weapon. There is the practicing, usually. And there is the penetration and the participation. All start with the letter P. Easy for you to understand and remember. Planning, procurement, practicing, penetration, the participation. Now we know that Tyler told his roomie that he had been planning this for about a week. So there is this planning stage. He knew where the venue was. He knew about that campus. And he was planning out in his mind what he was going to do. So the planning part is there for us to see. Now we know there's also the procurement part. We know that he already had the rifle, and it had been procured, or it had been gifted to him by his father to him, and the rifle came from his grandfather. And so Tyler allegedly took his granddad's scope 36 caliber hunting rifle, 30-06, to the campus of Utah Valley University, which was 3 hours from his home, and he allegedly fatally shot Kirk from a rooftop 140 yards away. So we do know that not only do we have the procurement, and not only do we have the practicing, in fact, we know that he pretty well did that. Listen to this. This is really a haunting text. He texts to his roommate, judging from today, quote, I'd say Grandpa's gun does just fine. I don't know. I think it was a 2-cake scope. That's what he bragged to his lover about in a text message after the assassination. So we know now that he procured it. We know now that he planned it. What about the practicing? Well, we know he did practice. You know why? Because police found targets with bullet holes at Tyler's home. In fact, they found several targets with bullet holes there in his home. That is according to attorney, again, Jeff Gray. They also found a shell with engraved messages on it at the same residence. Now, when it comes to practice, there's, according to reports, there's no indoor shooting ranges near Tyler's home there in St. George. But locals, it's reported, they often disappear into the Mojave Desert to hunt and sight their rifles. Someone said he would have needed to go outside to train at that range, and anybody is allowed to go out in the desert and practice shooting on public land outside the city. That's what Sean Wood, who owned a range and armory in the town of St. George. And Washington County, by the way, is a really, really beautiful place. It's right there on the Arizona border, surrounded on all sides, straight out, kind of like out of a cowboy picture, rolling red rock hills, narrow gorges, sandy plains. It's right there on the Arizona border. And by the way, the Utah Bureau of Land Management owns more than 600,000 acres of the Mojave Desert there in Washington County. So there was no shortage of what we might call a natural gun range for him to practice his shot. And we know that he did because we have those targets. So now we have the planning stage, we have the procurement stage, and we have the practice stage, and now we come to that penetration stage. How you get into the spot where you make the shot. And we mentioned that last week. He penetrated what I call the third ring of security, that outer ring. in which there was a major security breach. No one was spotting. No one was assigned to constantly check the nearby rooftops that we know about. And as I said last week, and you may call it Monday morning quarterbacking, I call it pure common sense, that any security leader who was responsible for the protectee would have checked and consistently had those eyes on the roofs. This was how President Trump was shot at an outdoor event in Butler. Now, how could you not check the roofs? And here is where Charlie's fourth footprint of a mass shooter, or one who shoots in a mass setting, takes place. He had planned this for a week. He no doubt knew the venue. He had even told others it was a stupid place for the event. Remember that? And he penetrated the third ring of security, and that security was basically non-existent. Now comes the final footprint of the shooter, the participation. The shot rings out. The shooter, he then uses the excitement and chaos of the moment to get away. Everybody's running every way, right? So if you're going to be running, it's not going to be out of the ordinary for you to be running too. We know now that he jumped off the roof. We see that in a video. He ran away from campus. He ditched the rifle. You might think that was pretty dumb of him to get rid of it. However, this way, if he was stopped, there was no weapon tied to him. He was just another college kid. He looked young. He was the college age. And he was just getting away from a shooting. You see, now we know there is a possibility that they would not have been able to tie the rifle to him without his father turning him in. There was no serial number, no way to trace that weapon. So we also have to say he did have some luck going his way, because the authorities caught the wrong guy, or guys. Remember, it was announced, we got a guy in custody. We have 2 guys in custody. Bango. We thought, many of us thought they already had him. But no. They had the wrong guys. And that, again, took attention away from him and gave him more time to get away. In fact, he got away over 200 miles. Now think with me. I don't think it's a long stretch, my friend, to say to yourself and myself, what if his parents had not stood up and done the right thing? What if he had not texted his roommate partner? What if he just remained anonymous, had not got on that chat room, had said nothing to nobody, his parents did not recognize him or did not turn him in even though they recognized him? Could he have gotten away? Yep, they did publish the pictures of him on the roof running, but remember, he was dressed in black, unrecognizable to most other people, except for those who knew him most, those who knew about that rifle. And while people perhaps would have been looking at people in the area who matched the description, how many would have put it together for someone 250 miles away from the scene? Well, in my opinion, it would have taken at least longer than 33 hours to nail this guy, if they were to nail him at all. And again, the practice part happened in the desert. No one would say, hey, I saw him at the range practicing. He was out there all by himself. His penetration was missed completely by authorities and security that day. And if you look at the video feeds of him, it really doesn't look like the close headshot you see of his mugshot. And while his parents recognize him, we do not have any reports that any other person who knew him suddenly said, hey, that looks like Tyler. Just didn't happen. My friend, just like I believe this tragic event could have been prevented, I'm thinking, had it not been for his parents and his own mistake of having to share this with others, maybe he would have gotten away with a crime of the century, at least for an indefinite time. But on the other hand, you got to think, just like Kohberger, more things came out. Maybe they could have found some DNA that could have been connected to a website that stored DNA privately. The video may have picked up the vehicle which he drove away with, just like in Kohberger when they found that white Elantra. But bottom line, we're fortunate that his parents did the right thing and talked himself into turning himself in. Yet, my friend, even though we're fortunate in that part, it doesn't negate the fact that a man was killed, a father was killed, a husband was killed, a leader was killed, an influencer who helped elect a president was gunned down before thousands of others. So it is an example of see something, say something, even if the person you saw was someone you love. Kudos to a father and a mother who had strong character and realized it's never wrong to do the right thing. They turned him in. They saw something and said something. Well, that's our lesson for today. We've talked today about the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk. Could he have gotten away? I would love to hear what you think about it. Reach out to me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Till this time, next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional information and podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.